The Final Fantasy series has always excelled at incorporating medieval themes and motifs into non-medieval games. An excellent example of this is Final Fantasy X, which takes place in the world of Spira. The majority of the medievalism in Final Fantasy X is in narrative format. However, there are also some visual and audio medievalisms as well. This game is an example of David Matthews' The Middle Ages as It Never Was, in which a non-Middle Ages is depicted using medieval motifs. In the beginning scene, a group of companions surrounds a campfire in a deserted landscape that is the ruins of a once great city. This demonstrates Umberto Eco's The Middle Ages as the expectation of the millennium. This scene displays both medieval elements and the ruins of an advanced city. Therefore, it depicts the Middle Ages as the expectation of the millennium in a post-apocalyptic format, where the world has reverted to medieval ways due to the apocalypse. This is further demonstrated when the main character says,
"Listen to my story. This may be our last chance."
By beginning in this way, the game is drawing on the medieval bardic motif, where companions gathered together recall tales of great adventure. The player is now taken to the beginning of the story and gets to experience the apocalypse. The major medievalist element of Final Fantasy X is Umberto Eco's The Middle Ages as so-called tradition. The game draws most of its medievalism from the traditions of the church, and this idea is introduced when the player first meets the final boss. The name of this boss is Sin, and it represents humanity's punishment for their sins. Much like predicted in the medieval church, it is sin that causes the apocalypse. After Titus experiences the apocalypse, he is transported through time and awakens to a very different world.
It's true Xanarkand was destroyed, right? 1,000 years ago? So it's just a big pile of rubble now, isn't it?
Long time ago, there were a whole lot of cities in Spira. Big cities with machina, machines to run them. People played all day and let the machina do the work. And then, well, take a look. Sin came and destroyed the machina cities. And Xanarkand along with him. Yeah, that was about 1,000 years ago, just like you said. If you ask me, sins are punishment for letting things get out of hand.
This is an interesting twist on a traditional medieval religious motif, the condemnation of magic. Rather than magic being seen as evil, it is technology that is evil. However, as Arthur C. Clarke says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Therefore, this idea could be taken as a different interpretation of what magic is. Either way, it is a good representation of the religious medievalism in Final Fantasy X. Entering Besaid Village presents the first example of visual medievalism in this game. However, it is a more obscure medievalist element that many would not recognize outright. When looking at the houses in the village, they appear to be vaguely familiar. Consider for a second Mongol yurts, and suddenly it fits into place. These houses seem to be inspired by interpretation of what the Mongol yurts would have looked like. Now, it is time to meet the Crusaders and hear their story.
To tell the truth, I don't even know what the Crusaders are.
You're kidding, right?
Sin, the toxin. Gotta tell him who we are.
Yes, sir! The Crusaders are sworn to battle sin. We have chapters throughout Spira, accepting all who wish to join our struggle. The hero Mihen formed the Crusaders 800 years ago as the Crimson Blades. Later, our ranks grew and we called ourselves the Crusaders. We've been fighting sin ever since.
What? You've been fighting 800 years and you still haven't beat it?
Well, we've steered Sin away from towns many times. And that's all we can do. Nobody's ever been able to defeat it. Our mission as Crusaders is to protect the temples, towns, villages, and people of Spira.
This is an excellent example of the Middle Ages as so-called tradition. Just like in medieval history, the Crusaders are fighting a holy war. Their war against sin is in a much more literal sense, as sin is an actual physical being. However, just like the real Crusaders, they are fighting for their holy land, which in this case is the entire world of Spira. In addition, just like the Knights Templar and Hospitaller, it is their duty to protect the people. Next, we see our first example of Matthew's The Romantic Middle Ages, with our hero displaying his first act of chivalry.
The summoner hasn't returned from the trial.
Eh?
Well, apprentice summoner, really.
Huh?
There's a room in there called the Cloister of Trials. Beyond is where the apprentice summoner prays. If the prayer is heard, the apprentice becomes a fully fledged summoner. Remember?
So someone is in there somewhere and they haven't come back out. Right, I got it.
A day's already gone by.
Is it particularly dangerous in there?
Sometimes, yes.
Why don't you go in and help?
There's already guardians in there. Besides, it's forbidden.
Hey, but what if something happens? What if the summoner dies?
The precepts must be obeyed.
Like I care.
Titus displays chivalry by rushing to the rescue even though it is disobeying the precepts. For this he will be labeled a heathen, much like those who did not follow Christian doctrine in the Middle Ages. He now enters the Cloister of Trials, which displays the next visual medievalism in the game. Here, the walls are decorated with strange runes. However, they are also somewhat familiar. Once again, if one considers the Middle Ages, the answer can be found. Although made more complex, these runes are a stark reminder of the medieval Elder Farouk. In addition, the Elder Farouk are often found carved onto stone. The sphere grid, which is how characters are upgraded, further demonstrates this visual medievalism. The runes are presented alongside a map of nodes on what looks to be a carved stone.
Whoa! Ah!
Summoners go on a pilgrimage to pray at every temple in Spira. Guardians protect them.
Now, pay close attention to the music in the background of this scene. The music in the background of this scene is the major audio medievalism of this game. It is clearly designed to sound like a medieval hymn and adds to the representation of the religious medievalism in Final Fantasy X. This hymn is repeated every time the player visits a temple as well as at key points in the game. The scene also displays the romantic Middle Ages. A common theme in medieval romance is love at first sight. From the look on Tidus's face, it is clear this is what is represented here. The summoners of the game go on a pilgrimage to pray at all the holy places. This is a direct reflection of the pilgrimages that often took place in the Middle Ages. Yet the summoners also act as more than just pilgrims. They represent a form of higher priest dedicated to the eradication of sin. The Guardians are another representation of the Knights Templar. Just like the Knights Templar, it is their duty to protect those on pilgrimage. Sin's attack on the village of Kilika represents another form of the Middle Ages as the expectation of the millennium. Here it is clear that even though one apocalypse has already happened, there is still imminent danger of another one. Therefore, the game not only presents the expectation of the millennium as post-apocalyptic, but also as the threat of the apocalypse to come.
What's ascending? Are we going somewhere?
You truly are clueless. Are you sure it's just your memory that's the problem? The dead need guidance. Filled with grief over their own death, they refuse to face their fate. They yearn to live on and resent those still alive. You see, they envy the living. And in time, that envy turns to anger, even hate. Should these souls remain in Spira, they become fiends that prey on the living. Sad, isn't it? The sending takes them to the far plane, where they may rest in peace.
Summoners do this?
This idea draws on many medieval religious traditions. The first is the idea that the dead must be properly cared for. Although much more awe-inspiring, the sending has the same function as a medieval funeral. The fiends that manifest are a reflection of the medieval idea of revenants or vampires. The dead that are not properly cared for come back and attack the living. There are many medieval documents that talk about this phenomena. Just like in the Middle Ages, proper care of the dead is needed to ensure the protection of the living. This also demonstrates how summoners act not only as pilgrims, but also as priests. As priests, it is part of a summoner's duty to ensure proper care for the dead and protection for the living. This also means that, like medieval priests, they must act properly or deal with the condemnation of the public.
The faith are people who gave their lives to battle sin. Yevon took their souls, willingly given from their still living bodies.
Huh?
Now they live forever, trapped in statues. But when a summoner beckons, the souls of the faith emerge once again. That's what we call an Aeon.
The faith represent medieval saints or martyrs. Just like martyrs, they give up their bodies in service of Yevon or God. The statues that their souls are trapped in can be considered medieval reliquaries, where remains or relics of the saints were kept. In the Middle Ages, it was believed that praying to the saints could cause miracles such as curing of sickness. In the same way, the summoner prays to the faith for help defeating sin. The interesting twist here is that the faith physically manifest as aeons that battle sin, rather than performing miracles from the background.
What's up now?
Maester Micah has arrived, that's what.
Micah? Maester?
Maester Micah is the leader of all the peoples of Spira.
People of Spira, I thank you for your generous welcome. Rise, Maester Seymour, and all of you as well. I present to you the son of Maester Giskel Guado, who departed for the far plain a fortnight past. As some of you already know, he has been officially ordained a Maester of Yevon.
I am Seymour Guado. I am honored to receive the title of Maester.
Now, we have reached some of the more political traditions of Final Fantasy X. The Maesters are the equivalent of the Pope and bishops. Just like these figures, they are celebrated by the people and have great power. However, in the case of Spira, the Church acts as both the head of state and the religious head. This plays on the medievalist tradition that the Church was actually running things behind the scenes. Much like the medieval Church, Maesters are ordained, but if one has the right connections, like Seymour, it is easy to get a high position within the Church. This scene displays the pomp and ceremony that many think of in reference to the medieval Church. It is also very apparent that just like the bishops, the Maesters must ensure they put on the proper pious display in public.
Where in Spira have you been?
Huh?
Yuna's been kidnapped by the Al Bhed Sykes. In exchange for her safe return, they want the Aurochs to lose.
What?
If they're only blitzball players, I doubt they'd do anything drastic. But we shouldn't take chances. Let's go get her.
I'm going too. This'll be no problem.
This is another example of the romantic Middle Ages. Yuna has been kidnapped, and Titus is off to her rescue. Although she is held captive on a boat instead of a tower, the principle remains the same. However, the game also makes fun of this motif. As will be seen, when Titus arrives to save the day, Yuna has already saved herself.
I hope you hurt them. A little.
During your journey, you meet a scholar named Michin. He will give you a lot of information about Spira's history. The following account is of particular relevance to the medievalism of the Crusaders.
This is a statue of Lord Mihen.
8 centuries ago, he founded a legion known today as the Crusaders. In just a few short years after their founding, their ranks grew throughout Spira. The Maesters of Yevon feared an uprising and accused them of rebellion. So Lord Mihen walked along this very road to go face their charges and refute them. He succeeded in winning the Maester's trust, and his legion became an arm of the Yevon clergy. It was then that Yevon gave them the name Crusaders, which they have kept ever since. And the rest is history.
This further demonstrates the parallels between the Crusaders of Spira and the Knights Templar. Both orders were warriors in service of the Church. Just like the Knights Templar, the Crusaders were also condemned by the Church. Many of the Knights Templar were tortured and killed, and the order was disbanded. Unlike the Knights Templar, the Crusaders were able to answer these charges with success and remain a part of the Church army.
You can, once you beat sin, right?
But then, a new sin will be born anyway.
Well, then you can just beat it again.
I wish I could.
Hey, you can. Trust me. You are the best summoner out there. Yuna, why does sin always come back?
Sin is our punishment for our vanity. And it will not go away until we've atoned.
How do we do that? What did we do that was so bad in the first place? Ah, was it using lots of machina or something? Oh, wait, was that such a bad thing, really?
It's funny. Ever since I was young, I never questioned it. But now that you ask me if it is that bad or not, I don't know.
But Yuna, how are you supposed to beat something big like that?
The final summoning. It's the only way to defeat sin. The only way. With it, we can call the final Aeon. That's the goal of the pilgrimage. The faith of the final summoning lies waiting in the far north to greet summoners that complete their pilgrimage.
Tidus and Yuna's conversation expands on many of the medievalisms present in Final Fantasy X. First is the idea that sin will keep being reborn until humanity has atoned. This comes from the medieval religious tradition of constant repentance. Another medievalism is the idea of not questioning the Church. In the Middle Ages, it could be dangerous to question the Church, and therefore, many people just accepted what the Church said without thinking about it. The final medievalism addressed in this scene is the Grail Quest. Here, the player learns that not only is the pilgrimage a reflection of medieval history, but it also plays into the medievalist Grail motif. The final summoning acts as the Grail that allows the summoner to defeat sin and save humanity, at least until sin is reborn again.
Brave Crusaders of Spira, protectors of all Spira! Believe in the path you have chosen. Let faith be your strength. I, Seymour Guado, Maester of Yevon, will bear witness to your deeds today.
Sir! What's going on? Why is Maester Seymour back in the Crusaders, eh? They're using Albed's Machina. They're violating the teachings.
Even going against the teachings, they're willing to risk it for the greater good. Waka, I think Maester Seymour sees that too.
Lulu?
I can only speculate.
Ask him yourself.
Excuse me, Maester Seymour. Why is your lordship presently present here, sir?
Please, speak as you normally would.
Isn't this operation against the teachings of Yevon? Aren't you gonna stop them?
It's true. I should. However, both the Crusaders and the Al Bhed truly wish peace for Spira. This Operation Mihen was born from that wish they share. Although it may be sacrilege to Yevon, their intentions are pure. And I, Seymour Guado, the person, not the Maester of Yevon, as a denizen of Spira, I wish them well in their endeavor.
But using Machina, that's bad, isn't it?
Pretend you didn't see them.
Beg your pardon, but that's not something a Maester should say.
Then pretend I didn't say it.
Here, Final Fantasy X begins to slowly reveal another of its medievalisms. This is the idea that the medieval church was extremely corrupt. The use of Machina, along with Seymour's response to Wakka's questions, begins to display this idea, and it will be further developed as the game progresses. However, before we discuss this further, there is another visual medievalism to examine. The player now meets Maester Keenock, who is in command of the Crusaders. He is the first character in Final Fantasy X that actually looks medieval. With his robes and sash, he actually looks like many people imagine a medieval priest would. It is interesting to find a character that actually looks medieval among such other fantastical characters. I cannot help but wonder if this was done to deliberately remind the player of the medieval church. After this, we again see the romantic Middle Ages. Yuna is once more captured and Tidus rushes to her rescue. However, the game plays with this motif in a different way this time. After the player has rescued Yuna, they meet an old acquaintance, Riku.
Riku! You're Riku! Hey! You're okay! How you been?
Terrible.
Yeah, you don't look so good. What happened?
You beat me up, remember?
Huh? Oh, that Machina? That was you?
Oh, that really hurt, you know. You big meanie.
It turns out that in rescuing Yuna, the player has actually beat up another woman. The way Final Fantasy X plays with the medievalism of the Romantic Middle Ages adds a greater depth to the story.
This may well answer a few questions.
What I am about to tell you is the unclouded truth. I swear it on my honor as a Guado. Listen to me very carefully, for I shall tell you the truth about my son Seymour. His mind is closed even to me, a Maester of Yevon. But I can feel flames of darkness burning in his heart. He is using Yevon, the Guado, and even the Summoners. If he is not stopped, he will surely bring destruction and chaos to Spira. I will leave this world soon, killed by my own son.
Jeskel's confession about his son Seymour further displays the corruption of the church. The fact that Seymour has killed his own father does not prevent Maester Micah from ordaining him a maester. In addition, when your character confronts Seymour, he displays no remorse. The corruption of the church is also displayed through the fact that after the player defeats and kills Seymour, it is Yuna that is branded the traitor rather than Seymour. At this point, Tidus is separated from Yuna, and the final secret of the pilgrimage is revealed.
The Al Bhed had no right stopping their pilgrimage.
The pilgrimages have to stop. If they don't, and they get to Zanarkand, they might defeat Sin. Uni could... But then she... Uni will die, you know? You know, don't you? Summoner's journey to get the final Aeon. Yuna told you, didn't she? With the final Aeon, she can beat Sin. But then, if she calls it, then the final Aeon's gonna kill her. Even if she defeats Sin, it will kill Uni too, you know?
This is the big reveal about the pilgrimage, and it adds another layer of medievalism to the summoners. So far, summoners represent pilgrims and priests. With this information, we can now add martyrs to this list. The summoners go on their pilgrimage, questing for the Holy Grail, with the knowledge that they will die upon its completion. However, they are willing to do this for the chance to defeat sin and give Spira peace. This is a direct reflection of the actions of many medieval martyrs and saints, who willingly died to protect their beliefs. There are tales of martyrs who went into situations they could have avoided, knowing they would die. The party now travels to Bavel to save Yuna once again. Here, the full extent of the corruption of the church will be revealed.
These are traitorous and unforgivable crimes that disturb the Order of Yevon. Tell this court what possessed you to participate in such violence.
Your Grace. The real traitor is Maester Seymour. He killed his father Jiskel with his own hands.
What is this?
Hadn't you heard?
Not only that, Maester Seymour is already dead.
It is a summoner's sacred duty to send the souls of the departed to the far plane. Yuna was only doing her job as a summoner.
Grand Maester Micah, please send Seymour now.
Send the unsent to where they belong?
Yes. Maester?
Send the dead? You would have to send me too.
What? Grand Maester Micah is a wise leader. Even in death, he is invaluable to Spira.
Enlightened rule by the dead is preferable to the misguided failures of the living.
Life is but a passing dream, but the death that follows is eternal.
Men die, beasts die, trees die, even continents perish. Only the power of death truly commands in Spira. Resisting its power is futile.
This scene is an excellent demonstration of the medievalist motif of the corruption of the church. However, it is a different interpretation of this motif. The corruption of the medieval church is often seen as greed and the desire for power. Final Fantasy X plays on this idea, but also takes it a step further. Rather than greed, it is death that rules the Church of Yevon. This is a brilliant representation of the evil or sin of corruption. Yuna is being tried as a traitor, and when Seymour admits to killing his father, it barely phases the other maesters. In addition, both Seymour and Micah are unsent. They are already dead, but have remained on Spira and are now running the church and state. So essentially, it is fiends, or revenants, that are in charge of Spira. The corruption is further displayed by the fact that Micah claims that only death commands in Spira. This is another exceptional metaphor for the corruption of the church, since once something dies, it decays. The idea that death rules the Church of Yevon demonstrates that the church is rotting from corruption. Final Fantasy X uses the medieval motif of church corruption very creatively to enhance the narrative of the game. To conclude, we will look at another example of the visual medievalism in Final Fantasy X. This visual medievalism is present in the form of the enemies and aeons of the game. There are many medieval manuscripts that contain medieval bestiaries. Some of the enemies in the game look like they could have come directly out of these manuscripts. Others seem to be more inspired by the bestiaries. In addition, the game also draws some of the enemy names and attacks from these bestiaries as well. Final Fantasy X is an excellent example of how a non-medieval game can be full of medievalisms. This can be very informative for understanding how game developers draw on known ideas and then mold them into something new for their game. By using medievalisms in the way Final Fantasy does, game developers can open up many possibilities for the future of the gaming industry.